everybody. Thank you for joining today. This month's AdminStudio Experts Roundtable. We got a good one for you. Just some housekeeping rules. Everyone will be muted for the entire session. If you have any questions, please go to the QA chat and ask your questions there, and we'll be able to answer those. And then we are recording this session, so if there's if you miss it, or if you want to share this with someone later, we'll have a video available that you can rewatch the session. And I'll hand it over to Venkat.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks everyone for those joined today. And today's session is going to be a little, special. So we got a special guest with us. Welcome, Jeff. We have Jeff Lutowski from Omnissa. He's Director of Product and Strategy at Omnissa. He's joining us for this special event on AdminStudio Experts Roundtable, where your regular Venkat and Mike, from Flexera, are going to talk to Jeff on how application readiness meets application lifecycle management, and then how we are better together. So today we're going to touch base on several challenges that packages actually face, and the lifecycle challenges, and how AdminStudio and Omnissa, when they come together, will solve the key problems of an entire application lifecycle. So without further much ado, thanks a lot, Mike, and thanks a lot, Jeff, for joining us today. And let me go to the next one. So we keep talking about packaging, and we've been doing this for probably 25 years plus. I think Mike has been here more than me, but packaging is fundamentally foundational in 2026. You cannot you can definitely do away with not packaging, but then most of the cases we see that packaging is an important attribute of how an application enters into an enterprise. It's just that in these last 25 plus years, what you've seen is that the complexity not just declines, but actually grows over a period of time. So what we see is that there is an increase in the expertise required, because there is a lot of diversity that is growing in. Some folks want MSI, some folks want MSIX, some is VHT, some is a VMDK. So there's an increase in the deep in the knowledge of packages that is required in order to evolve in the changing landscape of the Windows ecosystem. And we also keep talking about the complexity involved, because probably Jeff can offer some commentary on this going forward, is because the number of Windows environments are just growing growing at a pace than IT teams can actually handle, right? I think there was an interesting metric I actually saw on Omnissa's portal itself as to how the complexity actually is growing by the day, because the number of departments change, the number of organization structure changes, and it only adds more complexity to how packaging engineers are able to deploy applications to their endpoints. And it all makes. Go ahead, Jeff, if you want to add something. Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, you just had mentioned that I might have some insight there. One of the things that we've seen is that over the years, we've been doing a lot with applications. They're the lifeblood of the organization, and if you ask a customer about their applications, all of a sudden they start realizing you're actually interested in what they're doing at their business, because these applications are key to the functions. So there's, whether you're in healthcare, whether you're in finance, whether you're in education, these applications have specific needs for the specific work that they're doing. And so it's really important for their business. And to the point where if you look at the kids that are coming out of college now, you see that the folks that move from place to place, they find the tools and the applications that work best for them. So IT is always needing to continue to provide new applications or onboard new tools to really be competitive. Because at the end of the day, the business needs to be competitive and efficient. And if the tools help them to do that, then so that's why when you talk about these like applications growing and the number of applications and the types of tools and the types of things, now add in AI and it just becomes even more so. All of these tools just keep growing, and the complexity becomes IT's problem at that point.
Totally, and that comes to my next point, okay, which is packaging is necessary, but it is not just sufficient, in order to manage an application throughout its life cycle. The packaging discipline is really thriving. People are increasingly running towards ensuring that the application is truly ready for the enterprise to be deployed. But then that's not just it. The application needs to be continued to manage throughout the life cycle. So, here is an interesting, stat or a graph, I'd like, Jeff to cover, which talks about the number of application updates for a handful of applications, okay, in just, 2024.
Yeah, so this is just 9 applications and an operating system. So imagine one endpoint with a very light user that has a few applications on it. This isn't your heavy user. This is just one simple use case. But if you think about it, the number of users out there with the number of applications, the permutations, you start thinking about your full application estate. And then these applications updating constantly. Each one of those dots is showing how often these are updating. And each one of those represents 2 things. It represents change, which can be a bit scary in a business if you don't have the right lifecycle management and controls in place. And it also means vulnerabilities potentially. A lot of times, and a little secret, that even when you're releasing functionality, there's also open source updates. There's libraries that get updated that are constantly closing the doors and windows for these CVEs. So each one of those dots represents that. And in many organizations, this means hundreds of or maybe even thousands of updates a year that businesses are choosing. And packaging is foundational to this. The fact that you're able to package an application and bring it to the endpoint, it creates that trusted starting point for the application lifecycle. You know that what you're going to get is what your organization put in place. The operational challenge, though, begins with when those applications are deployed, because now when they're deployed, how are you managing the updates and the changes? Is that, the versioning, the testing, the rollout, the rollback? So should something go wrong, the security issues that come into play, how is that all being managed?
No, so that takes us to the next point. I think updates is one important attribute that Jeff talked about, but updates is just one part of the whole life cycle, right? And if you think about it, the life cycle the packager owns, starts from procurement and onboarding, ensuring that there is discovery going on as to what product is required, which version is required, find out whether there is entitlement for it, go procure it, okay, and then onboard it, okay, and then ensure that the application is configured properly, and then stay on top of the patching and update governance, and ensure that there is proper guardrails put in place for version control and rollback, and also stay on top of when the application lifecycle is done, when the application is no longer needed, it is retired accurately in the right way, appropriately, and we ensure compliance so that if this application needs to be completely undeployed from all of the endpoints, we do that as well. The reason why we keep talking about the entire lifecycle having this flexibility is packaging owning this flexibility of throughout the lifecycle is because of the cases that we see in the wild, which puts the entire enterprise at risk if the packager doesn't own elements of this lifecycle, right? So a packager or an app owner might actually own the packaging process, okay, ensure that the package is awesome and it is good to be ready to be deployed. But then if the engineer is not staying on top of the entire lifecycle, towards the right, you see a case in point, which is the Notepad++ fiasco that happened in 2025, okay, might just come in, right? So this was a very, very vanilla, problem where the package was good, okay, it was ready to be good, it was ready to be deployed, and it was deployed. However, what was missing was that there was the flexibility of managing the updates, okay, was not controlled by the app owner, or sorry, not by the packaging engineer, but it was with the endpoint, and users themselves. So what it resulted in was there was somebody who injected something into the update process itself, okay, so that end users were able to download updates which caused a lot of vulnerable or malicious applications to be downloaded onto the application, okay, rather than the original Notepad++. I think Jeff has a good perspective on this. In fact, he's probably written a blog about it. Why don't you talk a little more about this, Jeff?
Yeah, and we can probably paste the link in the chat there. The the blog just talked about the challenge with Notepad++, but it isn't just Notepad++. It's anytime we open the responsibility. So the question is there are times where it probably makes sense. You had all those dots across, and maybe you just want to trust the vendor in providing those updates. But at what point do you say we would rather manage this, or we would rather the vendor manage this? Because now you've got 10 vendors, 20 vendors, 100 vendors, 1,000 vendors. At what point are you extending that trust to your business? And I don't think it's the vendors necessarily that are the ones that are malicious. It's that somebody can get in the middle or hack it, or it could just be an instant, a simple mistake. You saw a CrowdStrike, right? That was just a simple update or mistake, and it happens. And now we're landing planes. So it's these businesses that are running finance, these businesses that are running healthcare, they rely on machines to be rock solid. And so the control is pretty important in these particular cases. So the blog there talks a bit about that and just really kind of covers and helps to recognize the responsibilities and the efforts that these teams put in place for packaging, because it is a lot of work to package all of this stuff. And that's why things like Flexera provide that automation to make it easy to package those applications. And make it a lot more reasonable for a business to actually have the control. And now you can balance that control with the autopilot, if you will, of some of these auto packagers that are these auto updaters that are out there. So I think it's just awareness and understanding that, and I like the way you put that case in point, just understanding that, these can happen and they do happen. And this one was particularly quiet. They didn't catch it for like a year or two. It wasn't like something big happened overnight. It was, slyly adding a code into people's environments. So I mean, it's a real risk out there.
Totally. And there's so many unsecure update processes, which can just be intercepted by somebody, right? I think, enterprises, is probably a best practice for enterprises to, simply turn off updates. I recall seeing a blog from our own people, back in the day where, flexibility is good and user flexibility is awesome, but, enterprise security, trumps all of these, right? And some of these, really do not require a lot of, security vulnerability scanners for that matter, right? So they can actually be cut off at source, using tools like AdminStudio, where, you just go ahead and either repackage it, or just from the original MSI itself, you find out that, hey, there is a toggle for me to turn off auto updates, and then deliver to end users.
And various customers will. It's interesting because various customers will have different approaches. Everything from we lock down the machine and we reboot people in the middle of their Word document editing, to we just give them admin access and let them go for it. And it varies based on industry and based on approach. But at the end of the day, one of the common questions is the common answers to the question is, well, what do you have? What are your applications that users are using, other than the main ones that they know that they put in the image or make available when they first onboard a user? They're kind of like, I don't know. We run programs to go and find out and look and see what's on these different machines, and that comes with compliance risk as well. But definitely not knowing what's out there is just a difficult place to be. And so I know you guys do some things around understanding what's on the machine as well, which is also a valuable part. And then you'll hear, I'm kind of alluding to what we'll talk about a little bit later. When you can control what's on the actual machines themselves, then you do know. Not only that application is there, but it's actually in the exact same form that you put it there. It didn't get changed or morphed or modified by some other code.
Totally.
So kind of, as we mentioned, packages are totally responsible for not just building the package, but they're also important for managing a life cycle. And although every business is unique, we mentioned the different verticals, we've seen across hundreds of organizations, regardless, they all share a common set of application activities. And application management doesn't stop at packaging. It spans this entire life cycle of every version of every application. And that includes testing, delivery, rollback, self-service, and telemetry, which ultimately feed back into discovery for the next version of an application. So you can imagine each version of an application follows this circular life cycle. And as we look to the, how this is on the next slide here, you'll see that there's the different roles and activities that come into play. So packaging teams prepare the application, endpoint teams manage the delivery, security teams handle the vulnerabilities, and super users, they validate these new versions because those are the ones that actually know how these applications work a lot of times. And increasingly, application owners, it's a new role that we've coined in there as well, which we know has different names in the business, but the ones that actually wanted to onboard the app in the first place, these owners can participate directly in the lifecycle activities for the apps they own. In fact, most effective workflows span multiple lifecycle activities because multiple teams are involved. Let's look at some examples that highlight how packaging, automation, and lifecycle work together. I know we've spent a lot of time talking about this, Venkat, and figuring out how can our businesses really solve this problem together. So maybe we can take them through a couple of demos. What do you think?
Sure. Yeah. So let's get started with something. So this is something that we want to introduce to our users today. So this is where Flexera and Omnissa have come together to ensure that there is a seamless process from the left hand side to the right hand side. So AdminStudio can now start converting packages into app volumes that can actually be managed by Omnissa's App Volume Manager. And then from there, the entire lifecycle can actually be controlled by Omnissa. So introducing this new feature, okay, is Mike O'Connor, okay, to talk about how we can convert packages from conventional applications to app volumes. Over to you, Mike.
Great, thanks, Venkat. All right. All right. So you can see here I've got AdminStudio in the background, but I've also got Hyper-V and virtual machine available. So as Venkat said, we've added the ability to support and create Omnissa App Volumes. So in AdminStudio, it's just a matter of right-clicking. In this case, I'm going to choose the FileZilla FTP program. I'm going to start with an executable. I'm going to choose the convert option. You can see at the top, there's now the ability to create a Omnissa app volume, in addition to the other capabilities like MSIX and some others. And this process isn't limited to just one. Here, I'm just making sure that I've got the right application selected, but you can see I could select other applications and have this go through a kind of a batch process. So you got the name of the final output, where I'm going to output it to. I could also generate a wrapped MSI package, which would wrap everything together in an MSI if I want to deliver it that way. That's allowing me the different options of which virtual machines I have available. So I've already configured the virtual machines with AdminStudio. I pointed AdminStudio to that Hyper-V server. I selected the virtual machine to use, but you can set this up in a batch process. And if you're using our AdminStudio Enterprise Edition, you're not limited to a number of virtual machines. So you got 10 VMs available and you got 20 packages, you could throw 10 of them at a time and go through this process if you want. So it's spun up the virtual machine. It's connected to a little guest agent that's on the machine just to facilitate communication. And now in this case, it's going to copy the FileZilla exe up there. It's got silent command line switches, so I don't have to interact with it or do anything. It's just going to run the installation, but it's calling the App Volumes app capture program to capture that. And you can see that was pretty quick. FileZilla is a small application, so it automatically created it, downloaded it, and imported it into the catalog. And you'll see if I hit finish that you'll see it right there among the other instances I have of FileZilla in different formats. And then if I want to see what the actual output is, I can see that it created the actual VHD file. It created the report. There's a little report you can see that goes through that. So all the various information. So just like using the Omnissa App Volume agent natively, but if you're already leveraging AdminStudio and using it to create other packages, you can use this process to create Omnissa App Volumes as well.
That's a new feature too with App Volumes, the generation of the report, so you know what's inside the package as well. So thanks for highlighting that as well, showing the new that just came out last quarter. So that's been something that's been long asked for in the product as well. But I really appreciate the fact that you guys are able to produce all of those formats. You've got VHD, which is where we're going towards, and spending a lot of energy on, because that also enables us to do physical devices. A lot of folks think App Volumes is just on on vCenter, which is it's been supported VHDs for the last 10 years, so that we could support multiple hypervisors, but also across different clouds as well. So it works on Azure Files, it works on Amazon's solution as well, FSX, and so you have the capability of running these apps on virtual environments in the cloud, but now also on physical devices as well. But I see you also still have the VMDK, so that they can upload that right into their vCenter if they're still using vCenter as well. So lots of different ways to get those App Volumes, and I appreciate you guys been able to implement all of those and get those in your solution. And one other thing I wanted to mention is that because it leverages our code for generating the package, you have 100% support from Omnissa for everything that they've done here. We support all of the output that comes from Flexera, because it is generated with our capture code. So that does make this a lot more powerful and and it gives you the capability of knowing it's supported. And then in the future, any updates or any fixes or any things we put into the product to make it stronger all come to you with the Flexera tool as well.
Yep, great point.
So I would I think I can probably show a demo as well. So I'm going to go ahead and show you a demo so you can see. So in this demo, the idea is to show you currently. So it's not just about application delivery. So I'll show you how we deliver, but it's also about control. And there's a lot of capabilities around App Volumes there that give you the capability of making sure you've got the right control. And part of that is knowing what's on each machine at once. And we use this concept of a marker so that you can keep all of the versions of an application. They'll be available to this marker, so that when you move this marker, you don't have to re-entitle or strategically push new versions. All you do is move the marker. If you move it from 11 to 2021, everybody will be on 2021. If you move it back to 11, you can roll it back. So this marker becomes a very powerful tool. So in this case, I'll show you how easy it is to take one of those packages. Let's say a Flexera generated package here in 2021, and you click the current marker, you move it. Now you can see Jeff is assigned this application. Because he's assigned the current marker, Jeff will now get 2021. But what does that look like on the user's endpoint? Well, here's an example of a functionality that we brought in the most recent version, which allows you to use the App Volumes Manager to manage which versions are on which machines. And this is a physical machine. And you can see here that I got a dialog. Now watch the shortcut on the desktop. Watch that Adobe Reader shortcut. So when the user closes this application because there's a critical update, that's how fast we can update the application. Literally a blink of an eye. And that as fast as updating an icon picture, you're able to update all of the bits and all of the application files and registry settings within a second. So you can see there, if I go and help about, you'll see that I've got the new version 2021 just by moving that current marker. So this is a pretty powerful way to update your machine. Now imagine you flip that marker, you can update 100,000 machines, and then you decide, oh shoot, I shouldn't have updated that application across 100,000 machines. You're not thinking uninstallers. You're not thinking another package to patch something. All you do is move that current marker back, and you can roll it all back.
Very neat.
At an application granularity as well. So let's take this a step further. Let's look at, now that you have the ability to deliver what we call apps on demand, apps dynamically to an endpoint within seconds, let's see what happens with what more powerful things you can do. Let's think UAT testing, for example. So you can see here, I've got Office 2024, as a new version that's available. The current one's 2019. But let's say I have a few extra cycles. I don't have to go to a separate environment to UAT. You don't have to track down your super users. I can just see right here, the user can click on the new version and try it out. Now, this is something that's normally only available from a modern application that gives you like a switch that says try. I'm sure you've all seen Gmail and you want to like try the new UI in Gmail, and then you say, no, I want to put all my emails back. It's too spread out or whatever. And you can kind of like make that adjustment. Imagine being able to do this from version to version in an application, and at the same time, be able to get that feedback back, be able to actually see as an app owner, the person who onboarded this app and cares about this app, I can see in my dashboard all of the feedback that comes back to that application. And then if the user decides that application, they decide they're going to give it a thumbs down instead of a thumbs up, maybe they decide it's not working, they can just go back and start clicking the older version and provide their feedback. So you really get an idea of, is it ready? Is it safe to push it out? Now, you wouldn't do this for every single small version, but imagine like the bigger changes to your organization where process is involved and maybe standard operating procedures, or the users, it will affect the way their business works. This gives them an opportunity to really give you that solid feedback before you do that. And
like
this is all. Yeah, go ahead.
Hey, Jeff, like you said, you don't necessarily have to find the app owner. You could potentially test with any user if you wanted to, and then it's easy to roll them back if you want to.
Yeah, exactly. And as you saw in the entitlements, you could decide which users are going to get 2 versions and try out the new version, which ones are just going to stay mainstream. Maybe you decide that there's a group of 20 users or 500 users. Maybe you've got 100,000 users out there and you only want 500 to have this, or you can decide what that sampling would be, and you can assign that to an Active Directory group. And every time you need to, you can just continue to use that same group. So you don't have to know who the super users are by name. You can just start a group, an Active Directory group of super users for a very business critical application. And then when it's time to roll out the new version, you just assign that special group the access, and they'll get the new version available until it's time to roll everybody to it. And then it's there. So it's definitely, and so you can see the idea is control, right? To the ability to be able to control what's happening on your machines, as opposed to just letting the auto updaters do it at their convenience, and the potential disruption to your business. And so if we look at the traditional model, this is how this is possible. The traditional model means all these applications are baked into the image. Or when I say image, the C drive, the C drive of your machine. But if you think about it, the modern model separates these applications from the Windows image. App Volumes becomes the lifecycle and delivery layer that attaches these applications on demand. And that's really what allows the versioning, testing, and rollback and lifecycle without rebuilding those images.
Very nice. Cool.
All right. So we talked about, thanks a lot, Jeff. I think that's been very insightful, and thanks, Mike, for showing this demo. I think, I'm not sure how much we caught this, but this is more about how we extend the left-hand side towards the right-hand side, and packages not just ready the applications from entering into the enterprise, but then with Omnissa, they'll go ahead and have the flexibility to control every facet of the entire life cycle, right? Now, this is an interesting discussion that we had when we were talking with Jeff. Is the complexity we talked about in the first slide, okay, is our evolving, because there is only one packager, but there are so many deployment paths now, right? So we have several users talking about VHTs plus MSI, MSIX app attach, or VMDK, or conventional formats, or I don't want a package, but I don't use them as it is, but I want to ensure that the compatibility is actually good, okay, with the operating system, with the rest of my applications that are deployed in my endpoints, right? So this takes from the left hand side towards the right hand side, which is AdminStudio takes care of being the single source of truth for the entire lifecycle governance as an entry point, ensures that there is a single packaging process producing the outputs for every deployment type, right? And then it goes ahead, produces not just app volumes but also the traditional conventional formats as well, and then also extends it towards deploying them to our Windows endpoints, virtual desktops, or published applications in the conventional sense, right? So this ensures that there is a single process for all of your application types issue, irrespective of how or which format you're actually using or which tools that you're actually using for the secure delivery.
Yeah. To add to that, Venkat. So when I showed my demo, right, I right-clicked on the application and chose it, but that's a one-off. But as you guys showed, there's so many updates going out over time for so many applications. We can set up with AdminStudio can be an automation engine, so there's ability to check in to see if there's a new update. But instead of using the built-in app update, which you saw could potentially cause some problems, we can set that up for automation. So AdminStudio downloads it, prepares it, creates the app volume or whatever format you're looking at, and then hands it off. Because that's what we've heard from people. A lot of organizations, enterprises, are like, yeah, there could be risk with turning the auto updater on, but I don't have the resources and the time and the effort to handle it typically. But with something like AdminStudio, you'd be able to handle that influx of updates, but also be able to have it go through your process and be able to create the format and roll it out in the way you want to, like with app volumes, and be able to test it with folks. So you got to kind of get the best of both worlds with that.
And you got three things going on right here that are really powerful. One is that you've got one source of truth. Mm-hmm. AdminStudio is able to generate the package and be able to create that updated application. You guys know applications, right? And so this is you've got AdminStudio generating this package. This package being in a format that VHD. These are all basically the same format. The idea is that you can use the VHD, but inside is the app volumes format, or we also use the MSX app attached format natively and deliver as well. But the idea is you can have you select one of those for your application, and now that becomes available as a controlled version. So it's not a package where it will install on the endpoint and do something different on every endpoint. It's now already installed. So AdminStudio has done the install inside the package with the app capture from app volumes in the second piece here. And then what you get at the end is the same exact application output. One source of truth that's generated by AdminStudio using app capture into three different ways of delivering applications, because the endpoints can come in different flavors, whether they're cloud, whether they're your own physical laptop, or whether they're delivered as a KVM remote application. And there's multiple flavors and vendors that do that. And so all these vendors are doing desktop delivery and then kind of leaving the problem of apps to the customers. But AdminStudio comes in, helps to generate these packages. We're able to put them in a format that we know is controlled and delivered across streamed, virtual, and edge endpoints in the same exact way, because they're all Windows at the end of the day. And if you look at the next view here, the way app volumes is coming in is it's not just different Windows environments managed by different types of solutions. If you see all of those on the outer circle are all different Windows management environments or Windows management tools. But when Flexera helps to generate these app volumes, now you have a solution that can use the same app lifecycle model across all of these environments, one or many. And apps is at a different altitude than the operating system with app volumes. So you are actually able to manage the apps at a different level and a different layer than actually the rest of the operating system. And so one of the things that we've seen from our customers is that there's been some pretty compelling results. When organizations modernize this app lifecycle management, they see significant measurable improvements. And I urge you guys to check out this IDC report. It's pretty pretty compelling results. We were very happy to see what our customers have to say.
Okay, so what did we see so far? Okay, so let me just summarize that in one slide. Okay, which is so the highlight of what we wanted to talk about is when app readiness meets app lifecycle control, right? So we're so appreciative of this partnership that having with Jeff and his team. Okay, to in bringing and marrying the the left hand side towards the right hand side, ensuring that the packaging process, the testing process, and the compatibility and the conversion, all the things that you love about AdminStudio are now very have very cohesive experience when you're working with Omnissa App Volumes as well, so that all the things that you do with Omnissa, from version control, patch control, rollback, and retirement, you can have the package type that can be produced by AdminStudio. We keep saying this, we are here to ensure that there is a single workflow process, irrespective of which toolset you use, so that you have complete control over your packaging process and also the lifecycle control, right? So a special shout out to Jeff for working with us closely to ensure that our customers get the best of both the app readiness processes and the controlling process.
Absolutely, I really appreciate that, and I also noticed one thing as well, that you support ThinApp, and we still do ThinApp as a format as well. We have many customers out there still also using ThinApp, and so Omnissa is definitely fully supporting ThinApp as well. In fact, we sell or we include ThinApp as part of our App Volumes Apps Essentials offering, and anywhere App Volumes is sold. So definitely. Feel free to continue to use the benefits you guys have been providing there as well. In fact, you can just take a ThinApp and put it inside an App Volumes and get all that lifecycle marker and staging controls as well. So really appreciate the partnership here. I love that diagram. It really kind of sets it well, because the being able to generate that package and being able to control it really go hand in hand. So I really appreciate Venkat and Mike, what you guys have done here, and I appreciate the time being here with you and speaking with you.
Absolutely.
Thanks, Jeff. And I'd want to probably hand off to Mike, but before that, my commentary is App Volumes is not just the only thing that we've been working on. So I wanted to also offer that, announce that AdminStudio is now moving on to a quarterly cadence, and you can expect quarterly releases going on. Okay, we'll continue working with you. We'll continue talking to you on what you really want, and at a faster pace, deliver at a faster pace, so that the features will actually be delivered to you every quarter. So with that, I would like Mike to talk about what's new in 2026 R1. Okay, and then also give some throw some light on what we're currently working on for our next release.
Yeah, sounds good. And just a reminder, any questions that you have, please ask them in the Q&A section, and then we'll answer them as we conclude the call. All right. So as Venkat said, we're on a quarterly release cycle. So we've already had our first release of the year, AdminStudio 2026, R1. And we had some great capabilities. Obviously, today we talked about adding support for Omnissa App Volumes, App Volumes. So as you saw, we can quickly create those natively within AdminStudio, leveraging the Omnissa App Capture program to create those packages. So that's yet another format. Idea with AdminStudio is you use one solution to create whatever you need. So if you need to release a traditional MSI, you can do that in AdminStudio, leverage vendor EXEs with scripts and wrapping, and now App Volumes, ThinApp, and other technologies too. So whatever you need, whatever format you need for your environment, you can use AdminStudio for that. We updated the ability during repackaging to capture the actual capturing process. So before we leveraged something that Microsoft has now since deprecated, so we wanted to update that. So now we record a video as you're going through the capturing process to help with documentation, to understand, if one person captures an application and goes through that, and then next year, maybe they've moved on and somebody else takes over and they want to learn how it was done before, you have a video that you can reference to understand how that capture process works, and to make sure that everything was installed, in the correct order with the right configuration as well. We now support Tanium as a new distribution system. So we've already had support for solutions like Microsoft Config Manager or SCCM or Intune, Workspace ONE from Omnissa we support. But now Tanium is yet another distribution system. So we want to be able to say that however you want to distribute out your applications, you can leverage AdminStudio to prepare them in whatever format you need, and then hand it over to whatever distribution system you want. And now that includes Tanium. Updated our Windows 11 compatibility testing to support 25H2. So every time there's a new build of Windows 11, usually in the fall, there's an update to that. And so this allows you to test applications really before your packaging, but you can reference it afterwards. But understand if an application is compatible with the next version of Windows 11. Probably very minor differences when it comes to app compatibility from build to build, but it's nice to be able to kind of just verify that the application will work on that particular build. And as you saw, if you're using the app volumes, you can use that as a help with testing too. And then we updated the Install Shield application that's included with AdminStudio. We updated it to the 2025 R2, which is the current version. They'll probably have a release later this year, and we'll include that in another version with AdminStudio. But yeah, so that's what we've had, and that's available today. So if you are a current maintenance or subscription plan holder, you're eligible to go to our product and license center and download AdminStudio 2026, and you'll get all these capabilities as well as some other updates. You can see everything in the release notes. All right, so that's what's currently available. And then what we wanted to do is we wanted to give you a preview of what we're planning for 2026 R2. And we're currently planning for May. Yeah, exactly. So it's a sneak preview of what's coming soon. So we'll update our support for our PowerShell App Deploy Toolkit. So we'll support that new version that'll come out of the box. We still support the previous version 3. So if you're still on that, we can still use there, but we'll update our support to PowerShell App Deploy Toolkit 4.1. We'll be able to support repackaging using the Windows Sandbox. So instead of having to set up a VM through something like VMware Workstation or Hyper-V or something, be able to leverage just the Windows Sandbox that can run on your local workstation. Application risk insights. So we'll be able to provide you some vulnerability information about your application. So to know, just in case, maybe by the time you downloaded the package and then prepared it, there may be everything can change in a day. So there might be some vulnerabilities. So we want to give you that information and insight so you're not deploying out something that has potential. We do support Intune today, and we can publish applications, and we can populate a lot of the metadata around the application that you would typically have to fill out and configure in the Intune web portal. But one of the things that we'll add is dependencies. So you'll be able to configure dependencies of other packages in Intune natively within AdminStudio. So as soon as you publish the package from AdminStudio into Intune, it'll have those dependencies assigned. We already can do assignment groups, so you can already assign applications to groups and make them required or available. There's some other data that we already published today, but dependencies will be added to that. Mac OS packages. We do a little bit with the Mac OS packages. They can be imported into the catalog, PKG and DMG files, and we can publish those today to Jamf, which is a popular configuration management solution for Mac packages, Mac machines. But we hear a lot of our customers have a small but growing fleet of Mac OS machines, and they want to manage those through Intune, just like they're doing with Windows. So we'll be able to support publishing Mac applications to Intune, as well as what we do today with Windows applications. So manage both of them with Intune. And then we'll have ability in the package feed module. That's our cloud-hosted repository, about 12,000 installers that's updating every day. So that's how we know when there's a new release, and we'll download it and make it available in that solution. So that's how you in AdminStudio can set up a subscription or subscribe to new applications and have it automatically downloaded and prepared. We're adding a new a learning mechanism to let you know that there's new versions available. So even if you haven't downloaded it yet, AdminStudio could automatically check in and download it. But some folks just want to be aware that there's a new version, and then they can choose whether they grab it or not. That's another method. We'll add that new version alert to package feed module. Okay, I think we got time for some questions. We got some in the chat.
Yeah, I think I see one question from Sudarshan. Maybe it's a question that Jeff can answer. So it's a two-part question. So how does App Volumes handle applications that need prerequisites? More than one prerequisite. Can you share any reference or a KB article regarding the same? Right. So Jeff, can you take that? I'll probably read the second one later.
Yeah. So that's a great question. And there are so a couple things. App Volumes delivers applications together, in packages. However, the way the operating system sees them is actually as if it was installed in the operating system. So one application can see the other application. So for example, you have a Java application and Java could be delivered separately, and they're able to see each other and work and function. There is actually one benefit to App Volumes that goes beyond that, is that it will automatically use what's inside the package over what's on the system or in another package. So if you really want two versions of Java or a DLL or something, if you include that in the package when you capture it, then what happens is it will use that version. So you can actually have multiple versions of the DLL where normally two files cannot occupy the same space on the system at the same time. So it's actually a benefit for compatibility. App Volumes is right now at a 99% compatibility, given a few different types of apps out there that are not supported based on the nature of those applications. But apart from those class of applications, we've seen 99% compatibility with applications. And a lot of that comes from being able to bring all the files, but still let them talk to each other. COM, OLE, shared registry keys, all of that works. So if Zoom needs to see that Office is there and Office needs to see that Zoom is there, they can see each other's registry keys, and integrations all just automatically work like they normally would. So dependencies can just exist and work on the machine. And I'm going to put a little roadmap in there since you did too, Mike.
Sure.
Coming very shortly, imminent, is an application relationships feature. So you can actually manage the delivery of those applications and the relationships and the order in which they are on the system. So we're including 3 different types of relationships: precedence, dependencies, which is the one that you guys are mentioning, and conflicts. And precedence says that I want this files from this application to be more important or override the applications from this one. So if one application is looking across the system and there's 2 applications with 2 different DLLs, it will always take that one versus the other one. The dependency says that this application relies on this application. So it creates an understanding that these 2 applications are supposed to be delivered together. So if I assign one application, the underlying Java automatically comes with it. So that dependency capability is coming as well. And then conflict says if I assign Adobe Reader and Adobe Professional should win. So that way you don't have both come to the machine, only the Professional will come to the machine. And so you can handle that level of relationships between one application and the next just by specifying that relationship right in the App Volumes Manager. So I think there was a second update question, KB article. I would just say sit tight for the next release, and you're in good hands.
There's a second part to the question, Jeff, which is, does App Volume support huge-sized apps like AutoCAD and MATLAB?
Absolutely. We have a chip manufacturer that has a 90 gigabyte application. It doesn't matter the size of the application. In fact, there's benefits on virtual environments because of deduping. So if you have a 90 gigabyte application and 1,000 machines, if it's sharing it off of a shared storage, instead of taking 90 terabytes of your expensive spinning SSDs, you now have a 90 gigabyte space. So it's 1,000 times the savings on storage. So especially for large applications, that becomes extremely valuable. When you start thinking about buying hard drives in, Windows 365, for example, that becomes very compelling, because going from a 256 to a 512 because of one application like that starts to get very expensive when you're renting the space. So there's some benefits on cost savings, but cost savings aside, we handle the app the same. We're not copying or installing the application. You saw how fast Word came to that machine when we did the demo. That's a multi-gigabyte application, comes to the machine within seconds. Because what's happening is we're able to just set the pointer to that VHD, and all of them are there. Whether the VHD is copied down locally as part of our physical support or capability of Windows endpoints, or whether the VHD is shared off of a file share because you got the benefits of cloud. Either one of those, it's the same VHD, same format, and you're able to see that application virtualize, is the term we use, but basically have the registry keys and file system for that application on the system right away within seconds. So it doesn't matter the size of the application.
Neat.
So,
very cool.
Thinking just from an industry perspective, ArcGIS, AutoCAD, Bloomberg, I mean, you name it, all the different large applications, whether you're building planes or microchips, we're able to support those applications at scale.
Right. Very cool. All right. I think with that, we're going to wrap it up. But I'd just like to say, as Venkat said, thank you, Jeff, for joining us today. It was a really great session. Thank you for sharing your insight with App Volumes. I think it's a great new capability we've added, and we're excited with AdminStudio. So, and look forward to working with your partnership. Moving forward.
Awesome. Thanks for having me. This was excellent.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for joining today.